Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and on this episode we're doing a top 10. Topic of the top 10, new generation wrestlers. And if you're not familiar with the new generation, it's basically after the Hulk Hogan Rock and Wrestling generation, the bridge between that and the Attitude Era. And it's defined, most places I've seen, from 1993 through 1997. I think the Attitude Era started a little bit earlier than that, but we're going with the common explanation of it. Going into this, we're only going to cover WWE/WWF at the time wrestlers, WCW, ECW, Japanese, Lucha Libre. They're not going to count to this list. It's specifically going to be on WWF wrestlers and their involvement in that company at that time frame. So hopefully that made sense. Let's jump right into this. Number 10, the 1-2-3 Kid. I've said it before and I'll say it again. One of the big moments in the history of Raw is the 1-2-3 Kid beating Razor Ramon. One of the big moments, one of the best matches in the history of Monday Night Raw is the 1-2-3 Kid and Bret the Hitman Hart. It can't be stated how big of an impact the 1-2-3 Kid, aka x-pac Sean Waltman, had on this generation. There's a million wrestlers that looked at him for inspiration that weren't as big as some of the bodybuilder types, that wanted to do a faster paced wrestling style, that wanted to incorporate more kicks, more high flying. And he was the guy that was on WWF television doing it at the highest level. He had amazing success in his career there. He's one of the catalysts that eventually bring on the NWO and D-Generation X. A major star. I don't think he quite gets the respect he deserves. I love the 1-2-3 Kid, hence why he's number 10 on our list. Now, number 9, Goldust. You'll never forget the name. And it's kind of hard to look back now, knowing everything we know now, and think of just how influential Goldust was. How different of a character it was. We're used to seeing characters like Sonny Kiss now. We're used to seeing wrestlers that are not just portrayed as gay and it's just, their gimmick is just that they're gay. Goldust was kind of on the forefront of that. He pushed androgyny. He was also a fantastic wrestler. He wasn't a heel just because he was gay. He was a heel, or perceived gay, which had become a trope at that point. He was also a fantastic psychologist. He would use that psychology and use homophobia in specifically his feud with Razor Ramon. And he was considered bizarre and different. And Dustin Rhodes pushed this gimmick, which I think anyone else in that paint, in that outfit, would have failed miserably. Much like anyone other than Mark Calloway becoming The Undertaker, I don't think that would have worked, or Glenn Jacobs becoming Kane, I don't think that would have worked. Anyone other than Dustin Rhodes becoming Goldust, and this would have been looked at as your Bastion Boogers or your Ludwig Borgas of the time. It would have just been another thing they tried and failed. Goldust made it his own, he made it interesting, and he's still going to this day. Absolute legendary wrestler. Separated himself from his father, Dusty Rhodes, and blazed his own path, and just an amazing talent in my opinion. Now, number 8, Alundra Blaze, aka Medusa. In an era where women's wrestling on WWE television was at the very lowest it could possibly be, Alundra Blaze was an absolute star. She was a highlight of any show she was put on. She absolutely went out there and stole the show. She had amazing matches with Bull Nakano at the time. On WWE television, mind that. While we had in Japan, the Joshis were destroying it. 90s All Japan Women's Wrestling is some of the finest wrestling that you'll ever see. Alundra Blaze was implanting that style on WWF. And it may have been just maybe one match a month or once every now and again you would see her, and you did see her wrestle the same wrestlers over and over again. However, she did it at an extremely high level. She's the woman that you think of as far as in-ring when you think of the new generation era. To me, I think she could have been used very much better. I think she could have been even highlighted more than she was. Absolute legend of the wrestling business. Fantastic wrestler. Alundra Blaze is our number 8. Our number 7. One of my favorites of the time period, Owen Hart. And Owen was just fantastic. He was your quintessential heel. He could do everything in the ring. You're not going to find a better in-ring wrestler than Owen Hart. And he was fantastic with his promos. You believed him. You believed why he would be a heel. It made sense to anybody that has family, that has brothers and sisters. There's parts of your family where sometimes you don't feel like you're the favorited son, like Bret was, like he said Bret was. Sometimes you feel like you're left out. And everybody could feel that emotion. And Owen Hart's motivations to not only prove himself and to prove himself better than Bret made him a fantastic character. And he carried this so well. I mean, whether it be his tag teams with the Bulldog or with Yokozuna, or his solo runs, or the 2 Slammy Awards he won, everything he was given, he ran with and he made his own. He had some of the greatest matches of the time frame. I still say Owen Hart versus Bret Hart at WrestleMania 10 is one of the finest WrestleMania matches of all time. Their SummerSlam cage match may even be a better match than the WrestleMania match. Just a fantastic wrestler. A guy who I'm glad we're finally in 2022 seeing some tributes now that Martha Hart's working with AEW. And this is not a knock on WWE. I know they tried to. The Hart family just didn't want to. But I'm glad we're finally we're going to see Owen Hart. We've had the Owen Hart tournament. We're going to see him in video games again. We're going to see him in action figures again, in t-shirts again. For all the fans of Owen Hart like myself, that we could pay respect to one of our favorite wrestlers. So I'm so happy he's back in the name Owen Hart is back in the wrestling lexicon again. Like, it never left, but now it feels like it's officially back. Now, coming from that, our number 6, the bad guy, Razor Ramon. Razor Ramon quite possibly is the greatest wrestler to never win a world championship. Whether it be as the Razor character or as the Scott Hall character, he's one of the great Intercontinental Champions of all time. The guy that was the catalyst for the NWO. He was the first guy that jumped ship. He was the first guy that said, you know why I'm here. You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here. He's just a fantastic wrestler. And I know a lot of it is based off of Scarface, but a lot of it is Scott Hall as well. Scott Hall made this character and made this something that was just cool. When a lot of the wrestlers at the time were corny and hokey and there were a lot of cartoon gimmicks, Razor Ramon felt cool. He felt real. He felt cooler than everybody else on the show. And everybody in my age group, 93, I was 16, 97, I was 20. So in that age group, you're not going to look for Coco Beware. You're not looking for the Berserker or the Smoking Guns. You're looking for someone that's cool. And Razor Ramon was cool. And he just expounded that on television. One of the absolute legends of wrestling, absolute legend of the era. Now, number 5, a guy most associated with Razor Ramon, Big Daddy Cool Diesel. And much of the superlatives I've said about Razor, you could say about Diesel. It's been documented, and a lot of people say he had one of the financially worst WWE Championship runs. I don't really think that's his fault. I think a lot of it has to do with how they positioned him. Other than that, I think the meteoric rise from being Shawn Michaels' bodyguard to world champion, I mean, he might not have been the best in-ring talent, but he had some great matches. His matches with Undertaker and his matches with Bret Hart, his matches with Shawn Michaels, Razor Ramon, 1, 2, 3 Kid, all the way up and down the list. He did have good matches. People want to say Kevin Nash is a bad wrestler. He's not a bad wrestler. Is he a limited wrestler? Yes. But he can tell a fantastic story. And much like I said with Razor Ramon, he just expounded on that coolness factor. Much like Razor did, Diesel felt the same until they put him in the Cosby sweaters. If you know, you know. But anyway, Diesel to me, one of the big success stories of this time frame. A guy that felt like they built him from absolutely nothing to make a world champion. And coming on this, our number 4. A guy we've mentioned several times already, The Undertaker. What can you say about The Undertaker that a million people haven't said already? Absolute legend, one of the great wrestlers in the history of WWF/WWE. A guy that got a gimmick that shouldn't have worked, much like I said with Goldust, but made a 30-year career out of it and made it one of the greatest gimmicks of all time, questionably the greatest gimmick of all time. Undertaker in this period, I don't think did his best work. I think some of his best work came post the New Generation era, when he started wrestling with Mankind more often, when he started really wrestling with guys like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels at the top of the card, and then carried into the Attitude Era with guys going up against like Kane and Steve Austin. But even with that being said, even with some of the hokiness here, Undertaker was still one of the biggest stars they had. He was an absolute stud, a guy that you could go to that would main event any pay-per-view and no one would think it was out of place. Just a fantastic wrestler, like I said. I mean, I could sit here for 5 hours talking about how great The Undertaker is, but if you're watching this video, you already know how great The Undertaker is. Now, coming from that, our number 3, the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. His name is intrinsically tied to half of the wrestlers in this group. Razor Ramon, Diesel, Undertaker, 1, 2, 3 Kid. Some wrestlers that are going to be mentioned in a little bit. Shawn Michaels is the guy. He's the guy that Vince McMahon looked at and said, this is the guy we want to run with. Yes, he had some problems. Could he be a dick backstage? Sure. I'm sure that is 100% true. He himself has admitted as such. But you can't deny the charisma. You cannot deny the in-ring talent. When you put Shawn Michaels in the ring, there's very few people in the history of wrestling that can touch what he can do. And when you got guys like Ric Flair saying that he's the greatest of all time, that's a heap of praise. When you got guys like Steve Austin talking about how much they enjoyed wrestling him, that's a heap of praise. Shawn Michaels in this era went from being part of the Rockers to going on a solo run to becoming a bona fide world champion and a face of the company. Just a fantastic run for him. I think one of the great runs. I actually do think his later run was better during the Ruthless Aggression era. But if you talk about the new generation, you can't talk about the new generation without talking about Shawn Michaels. Our number 2. Another one of my favorites, Yokozuna. As time goes on, people don't really remember how great Yokozuna was. He was a 600-pound man that flew around like he was a 230-pound man. Everything that you see about Samoa Joe, Umaga, guys of that nature, Yoko did it first. Yoko was a freak of nature. There is no way that a man as large as Yoko was should have been able to do the things that he did. And he was an absolute monster, whether it was the multiple championships he had during this era, his tag run with Owen Hart. I mean, Yokozuna was the guy. He was the penultimate villain, and it's sad to say that just a few years after the era he passed away, because I really think we could have gotten so much more out of Yokozuna. If he could have got the weight under control, if he could have lived longer, I think we would have really had some more great runs with Yokozuna. Just a fantastic wrestler, a fantastic heel, perfect guy for that gimmick, for that character, much like Undertaker, much like Goldust. I don't think you could see anyone else ever pulling off Yokozuna like Yokozuna did. Now, before we get into our number 1 here, on these lists, I do a thing called the best of the rest. Basically, it's for people considered for the list that didn't quite make it for whatever reason. With that being said, our first on the best of the rest, Lex Luger. If Luger would have caught on like Vince McMahon wanted him to, he probably would have been in the top 2 or 3 on the list. For whatever reason, whether it be Luger himself or the push, the fans just couldn't get behind him like Vince wanted to. Vince wanted to make Lex Luger his next Hulk Hogan, and this is not a knock at all on Lex Luger. Lex Luger, I think, is a great wrestler, a great talent. In this era, he didn't live up to the hype. And that's not, I don't know what the cause of that was. I don't know if fans were they were ready to move on from the Hulk Hogan type characters, which we know they were. We see that as the rise of the Attitude Era, the rise of the NWO, the rise of ECW. The fans wanted something different. So was Luger the first person to get that backlash where fans were turning on the old style of wrestler? I mean, we're talking about grunge music is coming into popularity. We're talking about gangster rap is coming into popularity. Quentin Tarantino starts making his movies in this era. So you're starting to see fans are tilting towards a grittier, more harder edge style, and you got this white meat babyface. So to me, I still think he had a great run. I just don't think he was great enough to make this list. Next up, another one of my favorites, one of my favorite big men of all time, Bam Bigelow. Bam Bam got the main event of WrestleMania against Lawrence Taylor, and basically, that's his biggest claim to fame of this era. And I'm not trying to knock Bam Bam. I absolutely love Bam Bam. You hear a lot that there was some politics backstage. He didn't get along with the Clique. You hear some other things. I do think that if Bam Bam would have got the company behind him, he could have been just as big as Yokozuna. He could have been just as big as The Undertaker or a lot of these other guys. For that reason, he's on my list. He did absolutely make some huge marks in the era, but he didn't make the list just because I don't think the company was ever fully behind it. Last but not least, a guy I know the company was behind, but much like Lex Luger, the fans didn't. They kind of rejected Ahmed Johnson. Ahmed was a guy that when you look at him, he looked like a star. However, his in-ring never equated to that. His promos never equated to the look. His look, he looked like $1,000,000, but he talked like $2. He wrestled like $1.50. He injured people. He was clumsy. The fans turned on him pretty quickly. He never progressed. If he would have progressed, I think he would have had a fantastic career. Unfortunately, with Ahmed Johnson, it was all sizzle, no steak. I did consider him for the list for how heavily he was pushed, but he doesn't make it. Now, coming from that, before we go to our number one, if you think I left someone off the list, put someone too high, someone too low, let me know what you think down here in the comments. Our number one wrestler of the new generation era, Bret the Hitman Hart. Bret was kind of old faithful here. If they wanted to try with Shawn Michaels and Shawn Michaels got injured or lost his smile, they would go right back to Bret. Bret, I talked about him with everybody here. He had fantastic matches with Diesel, with Undertaker, with Shawn Michaels, with Yokozuna, with his brother Owen, with Razor Ramon. Everybody on this list, except for maybe Alundra Blaze. And I don't remember if they did any mixed tag matches, but if they did, you probably going to hit me up down here to tell me if they did or not, if you remember them. Bret was the dude. He was the face of the company. As much as Vince McMahon wanted to make Shawn Michaels the face of the company, Bret forced his way into that position as well. You could say, much like Austin and The Rock, where a point became that they were both equally popular, there was a time where if you were a WWF fan, you were either in the camp of Bret Hart or you were in the camp of Shawn Michaels. And I think during this time frame, the reason that he stands out above Shawn Michaels and above Yokozuna is because in this specific time frame, he had more achievements, he wrestled more main events, he put on more classic matches than anybody else on this list. Probably if you put everybody else combined, he still has more classic matches than all of them. For that reason, Bret Hart is my number one. Now, if you think I left someone off the list, put someone too high, someone too low, let me know what you think down here. Like the video, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. And if you made it all the way to the end, let's put the black heart for Owen Hart in the comments. Just because I love Owen and I'm happy to see him back. Put the black heart down here in the comments if you made it to the end. With that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been my top 10 New Generation Wrestlers.